This is the Marvel Legends series, X-Men, Stepford Cuckoos. I picked up these figures at Hobby Corner. I believe in the US, the Cuckoos are a Walgreens exclusive. Here's a quick look at the packaging. Some nice, terrific box art right there. Great artwork. Not entirely sure who did the artwork, but it looks great. And here are the Stepford Cuckoos out of packaging. And for the uninitiated, you're probably wondering why I got 3 of them. It's not just because there are 3 alternate heads. It's because that in the comic books, the Cuckoos are actually clones or sisters, clone sisters. And they first appeared in 2001 in the new X-Men comic books. They were a creation of Dr. John Sublime. They were supposed to have these nanotech in them, and then they were mutant clones that had telepathy, and they were supposed to be a weapon number 14. Weapon 14 to eradicate all mutants. And if you want to be technical about it, there were actually 1,000 Cuckoos that were made, but only 5 were sent to the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters, or Xavier Institute, to train and hone their powers and abilities. And the first time I read about these Cuckoos, I just saw 3 of them. Now, originally, there were 5 that were really went into training. And they all looked like this. They were all blonde, and they dressed up in these prep schoolgirl uniforms. And I think the name Cuckoos harkens back to that book, The Midwich Cuckoos, where it's a story about these women that all gave birth at the same time, and all the babies were girls that had blonde hair and had telepathic abilities. I think they just added Stepford because, you know, Stepford wives, I suppose, the epitome of a very obedient housewife, all-American housewife, which is nothing to do with them, because these girls certainly weren't obedient. They were rebellious and all that. So I think it's the Midwich Cuckoos that was being resonated in these characters. Anyway, there were 5 of them. There were Celeste, Irma or Mindy, Phoebe, Esme, and Sophie. If you're having trouble remembering their names, just think of the word Spice, like the Spice Girls. S for Sophie, P for Phoebe, I for Irma or Mindy, C for Celeste, and E for Esme. Esme, I suppose, is Esmeralda, but Esme. And if you want to know how their ages are, who's the eldest, who's the youngest, just arrange the names in alphabetic order, which will put Celeste as the eldest, followed by Esme, then Irma or Mindy, then Phoebe, and then Sophie would be the youngest. Okay, so when they went to Xavier Institute, they had this big deal with Quentin Quire, and they blasted him with a psionic blast. And apparently one of the Stepford Cuckoos, Sophie, had taken this mutant power enhancing drug called Kick. It's really just hypercortisone D. Anyway, she died because of the overdose. So there were 4 left. And Esme, I think she is probably the most traitorous out of all the sisters, also took in some Kick, and she just got crazy. She had an affair with Sorn, and eventually Sorn killed her. So when I started reading again X-Men comic books, only 3 were left, and originally they were all blonde. And so after the events of Schism, Cyclops had formed his own team, his revolutionary team, with Emma Frost, and they recruited the Cuckoos to join them. And that's when they started trying to differentiate themselves. Phoebe wanted to be a redhead, and Mindy followed suit, and she wanted to be a brunette. So, and Celeste was like, no, we can't look different. So that's how they came about these head sculpts. Originally, if you wanted the Stepford Cuckoos, you'd have to get 5 of them, and each one would have the Celeste head sculpt. But the more modern one is having all 3 different heads, because Emma Frost had actually encouraged them to differentiate themselves and all that. And Suffice to say, these girls also had Emma Frost as their mentor, being a telepath, and they were also had telepathic abilities. And like most student-teacher relationships, it was a very love-hate kind of relationship. Now, what's very significant about these trio is that, you know, in the absence of Professor Xavier during that time, and there was no Jean Grey, the Cuckoos were actually the powerful telepaths on the X-Men team, and they had this ability to create a hive mind. They could, you know, from what it is, it's a hive mind, a connected sort of consciousness, a telepathic consciousness amongst themselves, and which they could expand to the entire team. So they were like the center of communications, and they were the ones who could use Cerebra, another version of Cerebro, very effectively to find mutants, and the Cyclops could recruit to their cause of the revolution. But after everything that's happened with Avengers versus X-Men and all that, Cyclops dying and whatnot, Cyclops resurrecting, whatever, there was the last story that we've heard about the Cuckoos was in X-23, where they tried to resurrect their fallen siblings, Sophie and Esme, by putting their consciousness into Gabby and Laura, the X-23 and Honey Badger, which they obviously they did. Then all hell broke loose, and they realized it was a mistake. They tried to get rid of Esme, and they got rid of Sophie and whatnot, and the three of them were all that remains, and they sent themselves into exile in Paris. Long story short, now that all the mutants have bonded together to become one nation, Krakowans, or in the island of Krakoa, and they have the ability to resurrect mutants, I suppose all 5 of the Cuckoos are going to be resurrected, or are going to be present through the technology of Krakoa and Professor Xavier hunting the consciousness and all that. So if you really want to be technical about this set, 3 is good. It's great to have all 3 of them because you get all 3 head sculpts in separate bodies. But to be technical about it, you got to get 5, so that you have Sophie and Esme as well. So enough of the history. I do apologize. I tend to digress. All right, so let's talk about the figures in detail. Like I mentioned, each of the figure will have this body sculpt. It's exactly the same. It's not different figures. They'll have 3 different head sculpts: Celeste, Phoebe, and Mindy, or Irma. And each one will have a Cerebra or Cerebro helmet, which is exactly the one we got from the Professor Xavier Rider set. And it still has that hole for you to connect that whitish effect. And the only difference is that the one that came with Professor Xavier was very much of a dull silver. This one has a little bit of gold flake. I don't know if you can see it. There's a little bit of a yellowish gold flake going on, but it's the exact same Cerebro helmet or Cerebra. And then each of the figures will have 2 pairs of hands. One pair is the open hands, and the other pair is the clenched fist hands. Not that they really use this, but it's good that Hasbro has given us some options. And finally, each of the figures will have these clear whitish translucent effect, which you've already seen. It's just a remolded into white clear plastic of the MCU Scarlet Witch effects you've seen in some other female figures as well, but it's the exact same one, and then you can just put it on their hands, and they actually come packaged with these. Very cumbersome. It's like, but they're telepaths. They're not really telekinetics, and I don't see them really using this. Maybe, you know. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, another mutation that they had manifested was they can turn their hearts into a diamond form, much like how Emma Frost can turn her body into a diamond form. They have hearts that can be turned into diamond form. That's significant because when the Phoenix Force came, they were able to trap a small part of the Phoenix Force in their hearts, which made them very, very powerful telepaths for at one point in time. But they eventually lost that, and they're back to being telepaths. And with the Krakoan nation right now, the mutant nation on Krakoa, they're no longer the most powerful telepaths or the go-to telepaths for the X-Men team, because Jean Grey's back, and you've got Emma Frost, you've got Professor Xavier, so you're one of those telepaths on the island. Still, nevertheless, they are a formidable trio or quintet, for any X-Men team. So yeah, very, very cool. So I'm going to show you the sculpted body in detail. It's actually very nice, very nicely done. Kind of reminds you of a Britney Spears figure, but yeah, very nice detail. Each figure will have a blazer or a jacket. It's got a white blouse, a green tie, green plaid skirt, and they're wearing all the same of them. They're all wearing green underwear or Spanx, white socks, and black shoes. I'd hope the shoes would have some heels to them, but they look like sneakers instead of leather shoes. That's fine. I think some of the parts have been recycled. I'm not entirely sure. This hand in particular, I think this is Magic's hand. This one is, I don't know, might be from another figure. I'm not sure. Articulation for the figures. Head is on a ball joint. That is on a hinge. Ball jointed upper torso. Ball jointed hips. Thigh swivel. Double jointed knees. Goes all the way there. Calf swivel. Ball hinge ankles with a rocker pivot. Ball hinge shoulders. Ball hinge elbows. Ball hinge wrists. Okay. Detail, give you a closer look at the detail of each of the head sculpts. Very nice. They don't have pupils. They're all in that telepathy mode, talking to each other and all that. Nice apricot lipstick. Very nice. A little bit of a glossy flesh plastic they used for the head sculpt. And one last thing I want to talk about, some quality issues you're going to want to watch out for. For all three head sculpts, it's really the eyes you need to look at. The lipstick are painted fine. It's the eyes. Make sure that the pink, white, and black ratio for each and every one of the head sculpt is in good scale. Like this one, you get a little bit of issues right there. And as well as Phoebe. Okay, then the hair sculpt, make sure it's a separate piece glued onto the head sculpt. Make sure it's the Phoebe head sculpt that's a little bit problematic. Make sure that the red hair sculpt is actually glued on properly and flush. That's what you want to look out for. The stripes on the plaid skirt, some of them will have some quality issues here and there. Just look out for that. And where the upper torso connects to the skirt, there's a little bit of a gap. This is probably the best one I could find. It closes in that gap, very, very little gap, but a lot of them will have quite a huge gap in them, but that's fine, not a big of a deal breaker. And finally, the right leg of each figure, you got to look out for that because the way it's been packaged right here, I've seen, at least 60% of the figures that I've seen in the shop were a little bit twisted like that, and that tends to warp the knee joint. So make sure you get one that's actually, well, if you can, that's a little bit straightened out instead of bent like that. So yeah. And so some final thoughts on these figures. Actually, I think they're great. I'm gonna give them a 10 out of 10. I was very pleased with it. Hardly any quality issues with them. And I think, 2 years ago, it was Jamie Madrox that was the Army Builder figure for Marvel Legends. Last year, 2019, it was Danny Moonstar. And I think for 2020, it's a Stepford Cuckoos for obvious reasons. And here they are for size comparison with teammates Magic and Emma Frost, back when they were still in the X-Men Revolutionary team with Cyclops. I think they're great. I think Hasbro did a wonderful job with them, and I wish everybody the best of luck hunting these figures down, being that they are army building figures. They're going to be very difficult to find. The good thing about it is that they are store exclusives. As such, they will come 8 per case, so the entire case is a solid case of Stepford Cuckoos. So if you get a fresh delivery for your Walgreens or at a hobby shop, they're all going to be the same figure, and you won't have to worry about getting other Marvel Legends figures with them. So with that, I hope you've enjoyed this little video review. If you did, please let me know in the comment section below what you think of these new Cuckoos Marvel Legends figures. Click that notification bell so you never miss out on any of my latest video reviews. This has been the Marvel Legends series, the X-Men, Stepford Cuckoos. Thanks for watching.